Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the First Baptist Church Sanctuary, your venue today. I'm Roger Smith. I'm a very happy and grateful volunteer for the Savannah Book Festival. I don't know how many of you were with the Savannah Book Festival in year one. I was doing this very same job in year one, and it seems like just the blink of an eye that here we are in year 16. This year's festival is presented by the Philip E. and Nancy B. Beekman Foundation, by David and Nancy Citron, by Robert Faircloth, the Courtney Knight Gaines Foundation, and the Gerald D. and Helen M. Stevens Foundation. We want to offer a special word of gratitude to Georgia Humanities, whose generous grant also helps to make the Savannah Book Festival possible in this 16th year. We're grateful as well to the Lemon Foundation for sponsoring this particular venue, the First Baptist Church Sanctuary, and that sponsorship is offered in honor of Carol and Joe Young. I want to echo Rachel's sentiments early on and encourage you to be a generous sponsor and donor of the Savannah Book Festival so that this wonderful event can continue to bring large numbers of people to our city and to serve our local residents alike. This year's festival, as I'm sure you know, is full of great events and wonderful and interesting authors. And by way of not missing any of the events that you want to be sure to attend, let me encourage you to download the Savannah Book Festival app onto your cell phone if you haven't already done that. If you have not and you need a little bit of direction, you can find those directions printed on the back of the program that you will find at all of the venues today. Before we get to the person you actually came here to listen to today, let me cover a few housekeeping details with you. First of all, our author, whom you came to hear, Shelby Van Pelt, will be signing copies of her book, copies, please, that you've purchased at the festival, not ones that you brought from home, and she'll be doing that in the tent in Telfair Square immediately following her presentation today. Another item that I want to make sure to convey to you is please to have a quick look at your cell phones and any other electronic devices to make sure that they're either turned off completely or at least turned to the silent mode so that we won't have interruptions of the electronic variety. If you do elect to take photographs during the presentation today, we ask only that your flash be turned off. It is important also that we receive your feedback about your experiences at the Savannah Book Festival. So on the back of your program, you will find a QR code which will take you directly to a survey instrument, and it really does mean a lot to the planners of the Savannah Book Festival and to the funders of the Savannah Book Festival to understand what you as audience members take away from the book festival, your constructive suggestions for future years, and in particular, the impact that we can prove and demonstrate that we have on the city of Savannah as a community because of the existence of the Savannah Book Festival. As Rachel has already mentioned, you're going to see volunteers upon your departure from this venue a little bit later who are holding those yellow receptacles, and I hope that you will be generous either by dropping money into those receptacles or going onto your phone using Venmo, or you know what, it's even fine to mail a generous check to the Savannah Book Festival after the day is over with. I want to explain further that the prepared remarks today will be of an appropriate length that will leave time for questions and answers at the conclusion of the prepared remarks. And the way that that will work is that as soon as you have given Shelby Van Pelt your generous and warm and gracious applause, I'll come forward again and I will help her moderate the Q&A. Please raise your hand and member of our volunteer team will bring a microphone to you so that your questions can be heard not just by the speaker but also by everyone else in the room. And I would ask, and I'll remind you again when the time comes, that we want to be sure to entertain as many questions as possible, and we can do that by having you get to your question right away without a lengthy story or statement. So ask a question, relinquish the microphone, and then we can all listen to the answer. So our author in this hour, Shelby Van Pelt, is with us today, courtesy of generous sponsorship from Rachel Young Fields and Sean Fields, as well as from Sydney Rangley. Shelby Van Pelt was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, and today she lives in the suburbs of Chicago with her family. This is her debut novel. It's called Remarkably Bright Creatures, and I think that we can agree that through signals like an appearance on the Today Show and a capacity audience today at the Savannah Book Festival, that there's a lot of excitement about this debut novel, and I join you in being excited to hear what she will have to say, and if you haven't read the book yet, I know that you're going to want to acquire a copy of it. So I know that you will all want to join me in giving a very warm Savannah Book Festival welcome to Shelby Van Pelt.
Hey, I didn't trip. Hi, oh my God. This is the biggest crowd I have ever spoken to, so thank you. Yesterday I did the outreach for the high schoolers, and I have to admit that I was terrified by that. And I was like, this is gonna, talking to you guys is gonna be kind of the icing on the cake, because this is much easier for me than teenagers, so. But actually, they were lovely. It went really well. So you're here because you probably have either heard of Remarkably Bright Creatures, or maybe some of you have read it already. I'll give just a little bit of background on the book. As you know, it's a book about an octopus, but I like to say it's not really a book about an octopus. There is a very naughty octopus who serves as a narrator for part of the novel, but really it's a book about unexpected friendship, about kind of getting unstuck in life and making connections to help you heal from the past and move forward. The number one question that I get at book events is, like, why? How? Like, why an octopus? And it's I don't know, I guess it's an appropriate story, because the idea came from a YouTube video, which I feel is like really appropriate for our digital age, I guess. But yeah, this was, my daughter is turning 9 next week, so now I think I have to, and I was pregnant with her when this was happening, so I guess it's been a decade now since this idea came about. Marcellus is officially 10 years old, in my mind anyway. But yeah, I was actually living in Atlanta. I'd moved to a new city for my husband's job, did not know anyone there. And I had always liked writing, but had never really thought of myself as a creative person. I thought maybe when I was younger, I might go into journalism or something like that. Ended up not doing that because I needed to get a better job to pay my student loans. But I ended up in this place in my life where I was in a new city. I wasn't working yet, and I kind of had some time. So I thought, well, maybe I'll take a creative writing class. And the previous owners of our house had subscribed to the Emory University Continuing Education Catalog, like the paper one. And so that was in our mailbox, and I guess it was kind of fate or something, because there was this class, and I said, well, I'll take that and maybe meet some people. And it was in that class, in one of the first meetings, that we had this writing exercise to just like do a sketch from an unusual point of view. And my mind went to this octopus video I had seen. I don't remember if it was like a week earlier or a few months or something like that, but I had seen this YouTube video of a captive giant Pacific octopus that was trying to get out repeatedly, and kind of went down this rabbit hole of octopuses on the internet, which is a wonderful rabbit hole to go down if you have an afternoon to waste. Yeah, octopuses rule the internet. Like, I think they're giving cats a run for their money. So yes, I thought of this octopus, and I just thought, well, that's an unusual point of view, and that would be a really fun character to write. And I knew that octopuses were very intelligent, and so this voice kind of came into my head of like, well, this octopus would be really looking down on the humans who are holding him captive, and would just be bored beyond imagination in this tank. They're not giving him enough stimulus, and he has all the time in the world to just observe the humans. It's just kind of fun. It's like turning it the other way around, right? Like, we go to aquariums to observe the fish, but, particularly in the case of an octopus, if you've ever been at an aquarium and kind of had that moment where they're watching you and you're watching them, it's very much like a two-way observation. So I did this little character sketch on a piece of notebook paper, and the instructor of that class, fortunately, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that she probably changed the course of my life when she said, hey, this is really good. Have you thought about expanding on this more? And so I kind of started doing that. Whenever anyone asks me how long it took to write the book, I always say, like, it took many, many years, but really, like, most of that was not very productive writing. I think for about 6 or 7 years, I kept writing the first, 3 chapters over and over again. I also had kids during that time, and so I was busy with that phase of life of being a mom to young kids. But, I would pick it up every so often, and, think, okay, I'm going to keep working on this. And then I would go back to chapter 1 and rewrite the opening and tweak it and just, it was a very, very polished first chapter that, by the way, ended up getting cut from the book at the end of the day. So, but someone at a book panel one time, I'm going to steal their description because a lot of authors do this. This is a thing where you get stuck in this kind of edit loop rather than working forward into your story. But it would be like if you were building a statue and you built the feet, and then you had these really detailed, carved, polished, perfect feet, but it cuts off at mid calf because you never built it any farther up. So I was stuck in that place for 6 years or something until 2019. I read a wonderful nonfiction book called The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery. If you haven't read it, and you like octopuses, or even if you don't, if you want to learn more about them, it's a fantastic book. Cy Montgomery is a nature and science journalist, and she's a wonderfully talented writer, and this book reads like a page-turner. It doesn't read like a science book. It's very, very entertaining. So, I read that book, and I thought, oh, man, I had started this, this fiction book so long ago, I really should finish it. And luckily, I had a longtime critique partner, who was actually from that first class that I took, was where I met her. And she was in the same boat. We had both been, working on the first 3 chapters of these novels for years. And so we made this pact that we were going to finish together. This was maybe November 2019. And so we got 2 solid months in before COVID hit. And, I remember having this conversation with her on the phone. She lives in Atlanta, and I had at that time had moved up to the Chicago area, so we were doing this all over the phone and text. And having this phone call with her that was basically, are we really gonna keep doing this? She also had young kids, I had young kids, everyone was home, everyone's world was just upended. And it's kind of cute to think at the time, we were oh yeah, but it's just gonna be a couple weeks, right? So yeah, we'll keep pushing through. How naive we all were. But we did. We ended up pushing through, and in some ways it was the absolute worst time of my life to try to write a book, while also dealing with kids and trying to homeschool them, which I use that term very loosely because there was a lot of Netflix involved in that. But yeah, we pushed through and did it, and everything after that has happened very, very quickly, and it's all kind of a blur. But one of the things that I think for me was most rewarding about writing this book, besides writing Marcellus, if anyone wants to know what the most fun part was, it was definitely writing Marcellus, and I think that is almost universally echoed in what I hear from readers, and that was their most fun part to read. So that was definitely the fun part of it. But for me, getting into some of the heavier, emotional themes in the book, especially writing during that first phase of the pandemic, I think it was just really something that I needed at that point, and, I didn't know at the time that I needed it. But, here was a book about being stuck, and, I'm writing a book about being stuck while simultaneously literally being stuck. I remember standing at the front window of our house, which has these big windows, and we're on kind of a dead-end street that a lot of people use to go to a bike path into a park. So it was kind of fun during the pandemic. It became this highway of dogs and bikes and just people that I had never seen walking in the neighborhood before. But I remember standing at the window and just kind of watching all of this go by and being are we ever gonna get out of being trapped in this weird, it almost felt like being in an aquarium a little bit, and I remember having that moment of being this is weird, something unexpected is happening here with how this is kind of coming together. But the book does touch a lot on kind of loneliness and isolation. In the case of the characters in the book, including Marcellus the octopus, but then we also have a character, Tova, who is a 70-something-year-old woman. She had lost her son many years before under kind of mysterious circumstances. And she has also recently lost her husband, so now she is alone, and she takes this job cleaning the aquarium for something to do. And that phrase, like, because it's something to do, is, like many things, something that I lifted directly out of my real life. My grandma Anna, who the book is dedicated to, was very much like Tova. She was this tiny little Swedish woman, and she was super sweet and a very loving grandmother, but she was very, very stoic. And she never showed much of her emotions, and she always kind of had this shell around her, and she was always cleaning. Like, drinking coffee and cleaning at any given time were the two activities that she would almost certainly be engaged in. And, I just remember thinking at the time, I was very close to my grandma. I lived next door to her when I was growing up, and I was an only child, so I spent a lot of time with her. But I always felt like there was something going on under the surface, that she was sort of, just keeping it close to her chest. And, in writing the character of Tova, I think part of me wanted to just explore, well, what was she sort of avoiding by she was always keeping busy. And if she didn't have something to do, she would find something to do. And part of me wondered, well, what would happen if she just stopped? Why all this activity? Why is everything always just okay? Why can't she deviate from those routines? And so I think, I lost my grandma in 2015, so not too long after I had kind of started writing the book and exploring that. So I think, again, it's all these things that you don't really realize at the time you're doing. And then in hindsight, I was like, oh, I think I really was exploring that relationship. And it's been fascinating. My relationship with my own mother has changed quite a lot after reading this book. So the grandmother that Tova is based on is my mom's mom. And she's my whole family is like this. I'm like, I don't know why we're like this, but we kind of are don't talk about hard things and kind of keep each other a little bit at arms. I mean, I think it's kind of a Scandinavian thing, I guess. But it's helped our relationship to realize that and be like, look, I kind of wrote a book about this. Maybe we should try to do better. I don't want my mom to go into her own old age wearing a shell around her and having me and my children wonder, well, why is she always, keeping so busy? Why is she always cleaning? What's really going on? So that's been incredibly rewarding and honestly really unexpected. I was just going to write a book about an octopus, and then all this stuff started coming up. So it's been very rewarding. And I think it's really fun to see a book about family dynamics where it's not like the big loud family. There's a lot of books about big, kind of messy, in each other's business families, and my family's the opposite of that. We're the kind of stoic to a fault. We're overly detached, if anything. Even though we're close, but I feel like you don't see that in literature as often. So it was fun to be able to bring that family dynamic that is so familiar to me onto the page and explore it, and then hear my family's reactions to it, which has been funny. Yeah, anytime anyone asks you, are your characters based on real people? If we're authors, the answer almost always is yes, a little bit. And if I do my job right, you will not recognize yourself, so don't worry about it. But yeah, I've gotten a lot of that from my family, which has been kind of funny, but also good, because it's forcing us to talk about it and open up a little bit. So the other kind of big theme that came out when I was writing the book was just kind of the idea of vulnerability and making yourself open to new experiences. In the book, the two main human characters are both kind of stuck in this in a rut, really. One of the first images that resonated with me, and this was before I had even really written any of the human characters. I was still just kind of thinking up the octopus, but I remember being at the Georgia Aquarium, because we were still living in Atlanta at the time, and watching, they have that big tank, and you can stand at various windows around the building, and it's the same big tank. But if you stand there long enough, you will see the same exact fish or turtle or shark or whatever. They just they're on a loop. And I remember thinking like that, God, that reminds me so much of my grandma Anna. Like she's on a loop, right? Like it's this, you do this and you do it in this order and then you circle back around and you do it again. And that image of being stuck, I think, was one of the first things that that kind of led me to start shaping the human characters. So the two main human characters are both stuck in very different ways. Tova, the woman who is the cleaning lady, I guess, at the aquarium, just thinks she doesn't want to be a burden on anyone. She is in her 70s. Her friends are starting to move into the phase of life where maybe they are, moving in with their children or having their children move in with them, or just kind of making those shifts. And she doesn't have any remaining family. She is all alone, and she does not want to be a burden on her friends or her community. And so she sort of makes this plan to just kind of like slink off and not have to bother anyone with the messiness of her aging. And, obviously that's kind of her misbelief at the beginning of the book. I feel like characters always have a misbelief at the beginning, and that's their arc, is how they get it sorted out. And then Cameron, the other human character, is just sort of this failure to launch. He doesn't believe in himself. He doesn't take responsibility for any of his problems. He had a very difficult childhood, was abandoned by his mom, and has just always worn a chip on his shoulder because of that. And so, that's kind of the rut that he has to get out of. He has to grow up, really, and learn to have a little self-confidence. And I think with both of those characters, I put parts of me in them. I mentioned that my grandma always liked to say that everything was just fine, and I have caught myself saying that so many times. Particularly going through COVID and trying to kind of be the strong one and hold the family together. I'm very much the type of person who does not like to make myself vulnerable or admit that things are not fine or that I need help. Which was a lesson that I feel like I learned very acutely when I became a parent. And how I wish I could go back and realize that when my kids were babies and people wanted to help, that it would have been fine to accept help. I didn't have to be a superwoman and do it all on my own. But, I have a tendency to get, I think, stuck in my grandmother's same mental traps of, just wanting to kind of do it all myself and not wanting to share and not wanting to burden other people with my problems. And so exploring that character it's been almost like therapy for me, to recognize those patterns in myself and try to do better and try to work on them. The Cameron character, who is kind of the opposite of Tova in many ways, I think I also pulled some of me in my disaster early 20s into his character. In the book, Cameron is a little bit older than that. He's 30, but he is at just an age that I feel like there's this point in a lot of people's lives where your friends kind of start getting married and having kids, or they're not doing that, but there's this, there was a movie about it recently that was the 12 weddings or something, but there's this point in your 20s where all of a sudden you're going to all these weddings, and then everyone is on a different track of life. And in Cameron's case, he sort of is being left behind because he's not on that track yet. So I was trying to capture just kind of that moment in, kind of adult adolescence almost, when you're kind of trying to become a grown-up, but you're not quite all the way there yet. So those were kind of the main themes that were stuck in my head when I was writing the book. Of course, Marcellus was always stuck in my head when I was writing the book, and he is still kind of stuck in my head sometimes, which is honestly pretty fun, and I miss having him there all the time. But yeah, his voice came probably the most naturally to me out of any of the characters. I sometimes think that I might have been a cranky old man in a past life for how naturally it came. So yeah, do we want to do Q&A? That was my spiel.
So our volunteers volunteers are coming forward with the microphones. Does somebody want to raise a hand and ask the first? Here we go, right here. Nice to see you. Yeah. Fourth row. There's the microphone. Helen. Are they on? Here's a question right behind you.
Testing.
Congratulations on your novel. I love it.
Well, thank you.
And I want to know about the publishing process and what happened after you wrote this beautiful book.
Well, so one thing happened that was extremely lucky for me, and that was the documentary My Octopus Teacher. I don't know if you have seen that on Netflix. That came out in, I think, August of 2020, and I was querying my manuscript in like September of 2020. So that was an incredible stroke of luck, but I feel like the kind of fervor that created around octopuses really like kind of accelerated the interest and the timeline. So I think my publishing process has been like relatively fast compared to what some people have for a debut novel in traditional publishing. But yeah, I cold queried agents was, kind of the old-fashioned way. You write the query letter and you send them a sample chapter and hope that you actually hear back, because a lot of times you don't. You just assume it's a no. But I got lucky that one of my first queries caught the attention of Kristen Nelson, who eventually became my agent. But it's kind of funny. So Kristen, my agent, has an assistant who reads all the queries first, and she picks out the ones that are good enough to go on to Kristen herself, and it's a depressingly small percentage. Like it's a tough industry. But so Maria, Kristen's assistant, actually wrote in the margin of my cover letter, "This is either brilliant or bananas," in reference to I had opened it, and I went a little bit cheeky because you have to stand out. Like it's, they are reading so many of these. Literally thousands of these pitches, and so I went full Marcellus for my query letter, and it worked. I guess they decided it was maybe both brilliant and bananas. So, but yeah, and it was a fairly straightforward process after that. We sold the book to Echo HarperCollins, and here we are.
Yes.
Hi, we loved your book also, but I was wondering how you came up with the mystery part of it, because that was very intriguing as well. The key and the mystery of the father disappearing.
Yeah, it was also intriguing to me while I was writing it, because I did not know what was going to happen. Again, this is my first book. I had no idea how to write a book when I was writing it. I still don't really have any idea how to write a book. I've heard that there are some people who write outlines and have these things figured out in advance. I am not that girl. So, I think a lot of the little details kind of came together on the first big edit that I did after I had drafted it. Come to the end and realized, oh, so that's how that's going to fit together. And then having to kind of go back and really work on those little details to make it make sense. Another thing that my editor did that they were very stingy with Marcellus. I think the original manuscript that we sold had a little bit more Marcellus in it. And they were worried that we would have too much Marcellus. So one of the things that we did with his chapters was really make sure that there was a point to them beyond just like, this is fun, listening to an octopus, like rag on, whatever. And so a lot of those little details, I kind of used those chapters as ways to communicate small details to the reader that ultimately would fit into the, answering of all these questions. But yeah, I'm hoping on my next book that I can get the plotting down a little bit better and not have to do so many rewrites and edits. We'll see.
For someone who doesn't know how to write a book, you sure turn out a good book.
Thanks.
But I have a question about the business aspect. You mentioned that in your query letter, you sent along a chapter. Was it the first chapter, the grab-you chapter, or did you choose a chapter because you thought it would give a better idea of your writing or your story?
That's a great question. So I went back and forth with some of my writer friends about how to do that. So typically, I think you're supposed to send either the first chapter or the first 10 pages. Like that is the instruction there's a program called Query Tracker where you do all of this because it's all electronic now. And the first chapter of my book was only about a page. It's Marcellus talking. It's reads more like a prologue than a chapter, even though it's not a prologue because obviously this is a pattern that repeats throughout the book, these sort of short first-person chapters from his point of view. And I went back and forth. I'm like, well, do I just put that? Do I just break the rules and put that plus the first kind of third-person narrative chapter? And that's what I ended up doing, and nobody called me out on it, so I hope that was the right decision. But I didn't want to be in the query letter, which is on top. It's all about Marcellus and how this is such a unique point of view, and I was really trying to sell the book on its uniqueness. So I didn't want to leave out that first chapter because that kind of that's Marcellus. That is what is meant to pull you into the story. So apparently it worked. So I guess it was the right choice.
Then we'll come over to this side next. About 5 rows back.
So this was one of my top 5 favorite books of last year. I have passed it along to no less than 15 people that I know. But I'll be honest, the thing that first caught my attention about the book was the cover. And I found the cover, I added it to my list of books to read, and then I started hearing more about the story itself. So I guess my question for you is, how did you decide on that cover art? And I haven't heard any authors yet today talk about the cover and how that process works. And so I'm just curious how that came about in this book.
Yeah, so I had primed myself for a fight about the cover because in traditional publishing, it's the publisher's call. It's written in the contract that they will get the author's input, but at the end of the day, it's their responsibility to market the book, and the cover is part of that. So I was kind of bracing for I heard from so many authors who were unhappy with their covers and have to kind of have a back and forth about it to get something that everyone's happy with. But I was thrilled with the cover that they made me from the first version of it that I saw. It's actually an original watercolor painting that the artist is Vivian L. Rowe. She's a graphic artist, and she's on staff at Echo. I think it was one of the first covers that she did after joining Echo. But we were all just kind of blown away by it. I was pleasantly surprised that they went with a pretty realistic kind of picture of the plot. Books don't always do that, and especially in literary fiction, I feel like there's been this trend of just a lot of colors jammed together and then a title on top of it. And they're beautiful covers, but I feel like sometimes they don't tell you anything about the story other than that it's literary fiction. So I was really, really happy that they went with an actual image of an octopus and a human, and kind of gave the reader a good idea of what to expect. Because I will say this, I've gotten overwhelmingly positive reviews, and I have been so just blown away by the response to this book. But there's always a few people who don't like it for whatever reason, and most of those negative reviews have been well, I didn't know it was too weird. I didn't know it was going to be an octopus. And I'm kind of well, it was on the cover, so that's on you, my friend. But I'm really glad that they went with the literal cover for that reason, because it is kind of a weird premise, and you wouldn't want anyone to be blindsided by being addressed by an octopus on page 1. So, great question.
Hi. I was just wondering what the process was like getting onto Jenna's the Today Show and Read with Jenna and stuff, because especially being a debut author, I know that was probably really difficult.
It was absolutely terrifying. Now, so Jenna Bush Hager is possibly one of the nicest human beings on the planet. They could not have been like easier and more welcoming and accommodating. But yeah, to be coming out of a pandemic, of being at home for 2 years and having a debut novel out and going, like, I think that was like one of the first times I'd gotten on a plane, because COVID was to go to New York and be on TV, and I hadn't done much publicity, and I could not tell you for the life of me what happened during those 5 minutes of live television, and I have never watched it, and I never will, because it was terrifying. But people tell me I did okay, so we'll move on. But yeah, it truly is game changing to be chosen by one of the big celebrity book clubs. I'm so incredibly grateful to the Read with Jenna team for taking on a debut author and kind of a weird book, but she makes good picks, and some of her books often are kind of weird books. I think that she kind of has a flair for that. So.
I really appreciated hearing about the book cover and the artistry on that. I want to know about the book title. Was that something you chose, or did you have a discussion about it? How did the title of the book come to be?
It is something I chose, although for most of the life of it being like, a project or a manuscript, it was just saved on my computer as Marcellus, like V_10-final, whatever. I kept just updating that. And got to the point where I had a pretty good final draft, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna query this to agents. Oh, I need a title. Marcellus can't be the title. That doesn't tell you anything, right? So yeah, I did a title exercise that basically has you mine your manuscript. It asks you all these questions. It asks you questions about other book titles that you like. It has you take all these words that you've taken from your book and kind of mash them up. And it was a very long exercise, and I think I got about 30 or 40% of the way through this when I came upon that phrase, remarkably bright creatures, that had been in the book, and was like, oh, I think that's the title. And I did get a little bit of pushback on it at one point from my publisher, but it was a very strange situation, because they sent me this email that was like, well, what do we think about talking about the title? Should we change the title? And I was like, no. And my agent kind of went to bat for me and replied immediately and was like, no. But we did have a discussion around it. My view on it, I wasn't trying to be difficult, but I was like, look, I put a lot of thought into this, and this is the best title I could come up with. If the rest of the team has other ideas, let's talk about them, but they did not have any other ideas, so I win.
There's another question already queued up.
I know that many of us listen to your book.
Yeah.
And I still hear the voice of Marcellus. Could you talk a little bit about selecting the audio, the people that do the audio for you, and also about the setting? We had, on our book club, had a lot of discussion about the aquarium and the water and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, so you're welcome for having Marcellus, Michael Urie as Marcellus in your head now. It kind of sticks in my head too. It is a voice that sticks with you. Michael Urie is the voice actor who did the Marcellus sections of the book and the audiobook, and Maren Ireland did the rest of the narrative, and they are both just phenomenal, rock stars in the audiobook world, and I still can't believe that they agreed to narrate my book, a debut novel about an octopus. It's actually the second time that Michael Urie has been an octopus in an audiobook. He also narrated Stephen Rowley's Lily and the Octopus, which is about a different kind of octopus. But yeah, I sometimes joke that I feel like I owe them my firstborn or something, because the audiobook is just killing it. It's still on the New York Times list. It's just stubbornly staying there, and I'm just yeah, go team. But the setting, yeah. So I grew up in that area. Shelby is a fictional town, kind of in the general area that I grew up, and I don't think I ever considered setting it anywhere other than the Pacific Northwest, because it was really important to me from the start that Marcellus is in captivity in this aquarium, but he's only 20 feet from his, from the sea where he came from, and I just really wanted that proximity and sort of immediacy to be right there. So I think it kind of had to be in that general area. But yeah, I think it just really, for me, came down to I miss it so much. I will always be a Pacific Northwest girl. You know, I live in the prairies of Chicago now, where there's no mountains, and the only water that we get is in the flood basin behind our house. So, so I miss it. And for me, I think it was just so lovely to kind of reconnect with my roots and really feel like, hey, this is home to me, and I can write a book about it and get the setting done well.
You stumbled on it. You got a correspondence course in the mail, and you said, "Oh, let me try creative writing." Do you consider yourself a writer now? And I think you hinted, is there a future book? Are you?
Yeah. So I still have this weird feeling when someone says like, "Oh, you're a writer, you're an artist," and I'm like, "Who? Me?" You know, I still have a hard time thinking of myself as being really like a creative or a creative person. But yeah, I'm trying to embrace that more because, you know, I am here and this is my job now, and it's a dream job, and I'm so thrilled to have been able to make it happen. Yeah, the new book is coming along. I've got a couple of manuscripts that I'm kind of going back and forth on. At the beginning of our time together, I mentioned kind of getting stuck on like that first 3 chapters. That's kind of where I am now with these new books, and I am really, at least I'm aware of it this time, and taking steps to better myself and get through it, as opposed to just letting years go by without making any further attempts. But yeah, it's pretty early, so there's not much to say, but I hope to have a second book out at some point. I have to write it first.
By the way, you did very well on the Today Show. Oh. Okay, so, but I was wondering how you came up with the absolutely perfect name of Marcellus.
Oh, yeah, so I originally named him Marcus Aurelius, after the philosopher, famous Stoic philosopher. And I thought that was just the most perfect name for an octopus in the world, because he's, you know, that's kind of the thing of the Stoics was, you know, consider your death every day. And that's what he's doing with these little journal entries, and I just thought I was so clever. And my critique partner was like, "Shelby, you cannot name an octopus Marcus Aurelius." And I was like, well, but she was right. She's like, people are going to think it's a philosophy book, like it's, you know, like a Sophie's Choice type book, and it's not that at all. Like that's just, you know, it's a fun book. And so I just made a portmanteau of Marcus and Aurelius, and I liked it ending in us. I liked, I don't know, I like that kind of, I guess it's assonance, or I don't know the name for it. Not a professional writer or anything. That's right. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Sorry. Just give it a second. Give her a second. You don't have to run. It's all right.
Get a workout in.
So this might be a strange question, but
I love strange questions.
Did your friend ever finish her book?
She did. She has finished 5 of them.
Whoa.
And I am still working on number 2. Yeah, she self-publishes her books. They are very fun little rom-coms and kind of sweet romances. Her name is Tara Weiss. She lives in Atlanta, so you should, if you're looking for a fun small-town rom-com, she's your woman. Tara Weiss. She's gonna kill me. No, she's gonna love me, because if you all go look her up, she'll be like, why am I getting all these?
Can we all say thank you to Shelby Van Pelt?
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
I want to say thank you all for coming again today. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to be generous when you see those yellow receptacles.